Thank you for downloading from Ravi Zacharias International Ministries. Support for this podcast comes from your generous gifts and donations. You can find out more about Ravi Zacharias and the team at www.rzim.org.
Have you ever been asked this question? How do I choose my pleasures? You know, everywhere I go, they want me to deal with the problem of pain. Where was God during the tsunami, as Jim said last time I was at Columbia? Where is God when it hurts? Disappointment with God. The answer to the problem of pain. We see pain as God's thorn in our flesh. C.S. Lewis says God whispers to us in our pleasures and he shouts to us in our pain. All of our theology sometimes rests on the ability to answer that one question: why is there so much of evil and suffering in this world? I can just about guarantee you this, in any open forum, if I were to write down 20 questions that would be raised at the end of the talk, this is bound to be one of them, if not the one as the nerve that answers, that connects to everything else. I know of so many people who say they've had a hard time believing in God because of the problem of pain. Now, may I suggest to you that possibly an even more difficult question is the problem of pleasure. And I'll try to sustain that for you in a way that might surprise you. And what I want to do, ladies and gentlemen, is read for you 3 slightly extended ideas. And if you'll give me your undivided attention through those 3 readings, once we start to unpack it, it'll be much smoother sailing. But you're going to have to listen very carefully to these 3 sets of ideas. The first one, of course, I lift right from the scripture, and that's easy for you to follow. Here's Solomon asking this question. Now, isn't it surprising? This is not being asked by Job. This is being asked by Solomon, who was that quintessential representative of success, music, Proverbs, Psalms, pleasure, wisdom, everything. And here's what he says: I thought in my heart, come now, I will test you with pleasure to find out what is good. But that also proved to be meaningless. Laughter, I said, is foolish. And what does pleasure really accomplish? I tried cheering myself with wine and embracing folly, my mind still guiding me with wisdom. I want to see what was worthwhile for men to do under heaven during the few days of their lives. I undertook great projects. I built houses for myself and planted vineyards. I made gardens and parks and planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. I made reservoirs to water groves of flourishing trees. I bought male and female slaves and had other slaves who were born in my house. I also owned more herds and flocks than anyone in Jerusalem before me. I amassed silver and gold for myself and the treasures of kings and provinces. I acquired men and women singers and a harem as well, the delights of the heart of man. I became greater by far than anyone in Jerusalem before me. In all of this, my wisdom stayed with me. I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. My heart took delight in all my work, and this was the reward for all of my labor. Yet when I surveyed all that my hands had done and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless. It was a chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun. Now, the key phrase in that reading are those last 3 words, under the sun. It is a Hebraism. It is a kind of a proverbial reference to the idea when God is locked out. You sort of shut the heavens out of your life, and you're in this closed system of 70 years and 10. And he said, I did all of these things. I was the envy of people. Remember what the Queen of Sheba said when she'd finished visiting with him? Not even the half of it is known of what this man knows. And yet he says, when I'd finished all of this, it was like a chasing after the wind. This is not Job speaking. He said, everything became meaningless. I found I couldn't hold on to anything. Now, that is an easier part to understand. Let me read for you somewhat from an old English writer. When I say old English, I mean he writes more in the traditional classical sense of the language. He actually happens to be one of my favorite writers. His name is F.W. Boreham, B-O-R-E-H-A-M. He's written over 50 volumes of essays, brilliantly done. He'll take a single little idea, write about 8 or 9 pages in it, and then anchor it in the Word of God at the end. Here is an essay of his called Phoebe's Perplexity from a book of his called Wisps of Wildfire. Here's what he says. Laughter, merriment, and fun were quite evidently intended to occupy a large place in this world. Yet on no subject under the sun has the church displayed more embarrassment and confusion. One might almost suppose that here we have discovered an important phase of human experience on which Christianity is criminally reticent, a terra incognita which no intrepid prophet had explored, a silent sea upon whose waters no ecclesiastical adventurer had ever burst, a dark and eerie country upon which no sun had ever shone. Dr. Jowett tells us of the devout old Scotsman who on Saturday night locked up the piano and unlocked the organ, reversing the process the last thing on the Sabbath evening. The piano is the sinner, the organ is the saint. Dr. Parker used to wax merry at the man who regarded table games as a gift from heaven, whilst billiards he deemed to be a stepping stone to perdition. The play we condemn, it is anathema to us. The same play or a vastly inferior one screened on a film we delightedly admire. One Christian follows the round of gaiety with the maddest of merry. Another wears a hair shirt and starves himself into a skeleton. One treats life as all a frolic, another as all a funeral. We swerve from the Scylla of aestheticism to the Charybdis of asceticism. We swing like a pendulum from the indulgence of the Epicurean to the severities of the Stoic, failing to recognize with the author of Ecce Homo that it is the glory of Christianity. While rejecting the absurdities of each, it combines the cardinal excellencies of both. We allow without knowing why we allow. We ban without knowing why we prohibit. We compound for sins we are inclined to by damning those we have no mind to. We are at sea without chart or compass. Our theories of pleasure are in hopeless confusion. Is there no definite doctrine of amusement? Is there no philosophy of fun? There must be. There has to be. Thank God there is. So here is the writer Solomon raising the question at the end of his journey into pleasure. Here is a writer of English vintage who says we are so criminally reticent in trying to understand this, a terra incognita, an unknown terrain. We have supposedly entered the high seas without chart or compass on guiding us on how to select our pleasures. Neil Postman, who wrote the book Amusing Ourselves to Death, compares the two philosophies of Orwell, who wrote 1984, and Huxley, who wrote Brave New World. Listen to this brilliant paragraph he gives in the introduction. What George Orwell feared were those who would ban books. What Huxley feared was that there would be no reason to ban a book, for there would be no one who wanted to read one. Orwell feared those who would deprive us of information. Huxley feared those who would give us so much that we'd be reduced to passivity and egoism. Orwell feared that the truth would be concealed from us. Huxley feared that the truth would be drowned in a sea of irrelevance. Orwell feared that we would become a captive culture. Huxley feared we would become a trivial culture, preoccupied with the some equivalent of the feelies, the orgy, porgy, and the centrifugal bumble puppy. As Huxley remarked in Brave New World Revisited, the civil libertarians and rationalists who are ever on the alert to oppose tyranny fail to take into account man's almost infinite appetite for distractions. In 1984, people are controlled by inflicting pain. In Brave New World, they're controlled by inflicting pleasure. In short, Orwell feared that what we hate will ruin us. Huxley feared that what we love will ruin us. This, says Neil Postman, is about the possibility that Huxley and not Orwell was right. You hear what he's saying? It's not pain that is ultimately going to ruin our culture. It's unbridled pleasure, where there are no boundaries set anymore, and we exhaust ourselves at the altar of sensually driven indulgences. Now, are there any parameters? Are there any guidelines? And I'm going to give to you 3 of them. They are very simple ones, and especially if you're a young person looking for some kind of boundaries and fences to help guide you. Take note of these and see if you can put them to the test in your life. You see, Solomon for 40 years wore the crown from the central time in Jewish history to the period of its highest glory and to its commencing decline. Every day he fed 14,000 people in his palace. He wrote 3,000 proverbs, 100 songs, and on and on and on. And he says at the end of it all, he asked himself the question, what did I accomplish? What did I accomplish? So may I give you 3 principles? None of these will you find explicitly in the passage I'm quoting to you, but my, is it ever implicit in what is being said? All of these come in very strange settings. The first one comes in Judges chapter 7. You don't need to turn to it because you remember the story. It's the story of Gideon facing the Midianites, and he wants to know how he's going to face such a daunting enemy. So he selects the maximum number for his army he can. He takes 32,000 of the choicest men. And then he goes to God and says, look, we've got a problem. I don't know how we're going to overcome them, but I've taken 32,000 men. Have you got any word of advice for me? God says, yes, you've got a bigger problem than you realize. This army is too big. I don't want 32,000 going with you. He said, all right, then what do I do? And he reduced it down to 10,000. God says, you've still got too many. He said, what are you doing with me, Lord? He says, bring him down. He said, I'm going to send 300 with you, and that's all you're going to need. One shall chase 1,000. You just need 300. Now, how does he select them? He is told to take these men to a river where they are to kneel and drink water. And while they're in the process of drinking water, he said, you observe, there's going to be 300 who will drink in one particular way unknown to them, and you select that person. That's the one you need in your army. The rest of them, tell them they're on paid vacation. They can go back home and enjoy their families. Gideon is nervous, but he follows the Lord, and he selects 300. Now, the thing is, these men don't know what is going on. They kneel by the riverbank to drink water, and they are in a very normal process of getting their refreshment on the way to a battle. So here's the first principle. Anything that refreshes you without distracting you from, diminishing or distracting you from your final goal is a legitimate pleasure. Anything that refreshes you without distracting you from, diminishing or destroying your final goal is a legitimate pleasure. What's the covert point here? The point here is this: you first have to draw out what your final goal is. If you've not established that final purpose, you will never know what is going to refresh you along the way. See, that's the problem with pleasure today. Most of us have not established a final purpose in life. Once you've established that, then you know what it is that can distract, diminish, or destroy you on your way to that purpose. Now, isn't it fascinating? Whenever you go to a company to work for them, they sit you down and give you their mission statement. What's the mission of this company? There was a commercial some time ago which was brilliant. They're all sitting around a table and they're talking about all the information problems they're having. This computer is breaking down, that machine is breaking down, this scanner is not functioning. They're going on and on and on. And one guy raises the question, what about the shirts? I say, what do you mean, what about the shirts? What about the shirts? I said, what do you mean, what about the shirts? He said, we sell shirts. And we're spending every meeting dealing with our information technology. We don't talk about our shirts. How easy it is to be discussing all of the peripheral issues and losing sight of what it is that your life is about. Have you ever sat down with a piece of paper and a pen in your hand and written down the mission statement for your life? May I urge you to do that. Take a blank sheet of paper at the end of today. If you've never done it, what is your mission statement in your life? May I tell you something? You will find this one way or the other haunting you if you have never clearly articulated this. You know, Susanna Wesley was the mother of 19 children. She herself came from a family of a mother that had 29, I think. They could have had their own church. And she was brilliant, raising in that family two giants in the faith, the great musician Charles and the great speaker and preacher John Wesley. You know, John wasn't more than barely 5 feet and change tall. He wasn't a daunting figure. If you go to his home in London and you look at his robe, you're not quite sure if it's an adult robe. He was not a big guy. And yet he traveled in his life having preached 40,000 sermons. You know, that's a lot of sermons. One day he went to his mother and said this to her, give me a definition of sin. Give me a definition of sin. She gave, I think, the most profound definition I've heard. She said this, son, if anything weakens your reasoning, impairs the tenderness of your conscience, obscures your sense of God, or takes away your relish for spiritual things, in short, if anything increases the authority and the power of the flesh over the spirit, that to you, John, becomes sin, however good it is in itself. If anything weakens your reasoning, impairs the tenderness of your conscience, obscures your sense of God, or takes away your relish for spiritual things, in short, if anything increases the authority and the power of the flesh over the spirit, that you become sin, however good it is in itself. Is it any surprise that the man went on to become the famous, profound teacher of the gospel to thousands and thousands of people? You know, when I was growing up in India, Delhi became my home. My father worked for the Indian government, and I'd never heard the gospel. Sad to say, I went to a church, but I'd never heard the gospel there. And part of the problem may have been mine, because I had no interest. I loved cricket, and I always wanted to be on the cricket field. In fact, I memorized most of the Anglican prayer book, not because I was so devout, but that helped me to time how much more time was left for the service to be over. I could tell you exactly when there were 7 minutes left. It was when the vicar would say, that let us therefore now draw near by faith. And I'd look at my watch and say, we're going to be out of here in 7 minutes. And as I was in that church Sunday after Sunday, missing the beauty of the prayer book, and it drove my life ultimately from the cricket field and elsewhere, to those of you who read my story, and walking from east to west to a bed of suicide where I had finally, in a marvelous act of God's grace, found Christ. I remember there was a day when I attended a summer camp where God laid his claim on my life. There were only about 50 of us young people in our teens. And when the preacher gave the invitation as what we would call at that time total surrender or total commitment, I walked forward. Almost everybody had come. There was, I think, no more than 2 or 3 of them who had refused to come. I remember that so well. There were a couple of sisters pretty tough in resisting this. They thought we were all being duped. And I was 20 years old when my father left for India and we moved to Canada. And I'd settled down in Toronto. Many, many years went by. And I would say maybe 15 or so. And I was back in Delhi preaching. And the mother of these 2 girls gave me a call. And I was with my brother-in-law, who was also in that group, who was also a new Christian at that time, who became a nuclear physicist and then went on to answer the call and is today a pastor in Toronto. It was both of us together preaching in Delhi. And this lady called me and said, would you 2 please come and visit my daughter, the older of my 2 girls? And she named her. She said, do you remember her? I said, of course I remember her. Said, Ravi, would you please come? I said, I'll bring Sundar with me. Is it okay? And she said, please do. We came there to the house, not realizing what we were walking into. And the door was open and we were told she's upstairs lying in a bed. We both walked upstairs and what greeted us was a terrifying sight. This girl, whom we'd known as a lovely young college kid when we left, same as our age, was twisted up like this in bed. Her face totally sunken, and needles all over her. I said, what on earth are we seeing? She said she had an argument with me, took an overdose of some drugs, didn't kill her. This is what is done to her. My daughter's a vegetable. You know, as a young person, when you grow up, you don't know very much of what just a few years ahead may bring for you. And as I saw her laid up like that, I called her by name. I said, do you remember me? Whether she understood or not, I don't know, but all kinds of gurgling sounds came out of her, and just the spit coming out of the side of her, saliva coming out of the side of her mouth, and she just writhed and writhed. I just held her bony arm and desperately prayed that whatever God had in mind, even in this awful situation, He would shine some light in that room in a dark place. When you make your choices, it comes as a package deal. And the package deal is to walk the way of God and to determine whether your will is going to be surrendered to Him, or you're going to try and straddle the lines and play half of life your way and half of life His way. And you find out at the end, that ought not to have been the way it was.
In the pursuit of pleasure and joy, there is only one thing big enough to fill the need within, and that is the person of Jesus Christ. Any other source leaves emptiness and heartache. No matter your battle, whether it's with the mind or the heart, we hope this week's program has been an encouragement to you. If you would like to purchase a complete copy of this program, simply call us at 1-800-448-6766. Be sure to request the title, The Problem of Pleasure, when you call. You can also order this message or other resources from our website. Visit us online at rzim.org or rzim.ca for those who may be listening in Canada. We hope these radio programs help, encourage and equip you. And if you'd like to learn more, you might check out RZIM Academy. It's an online training curriculum designed to help you become better equipped to answer questions from your friends and colleagues. This curriculum is filled with content from Ravi and other RZIM speakers who share their expertise in the form of recorded lectures. To learn more, go to rzimacademy.org. One goal we have here at RZIM is to reach students, and we do this through conferences such as Reboot, Refresh and Remind. These conferences are geared towards high school and college students, as well as young professionals. And the purpose is to help train young believers to better understand their faith so they are equipped to defend it. To find out more about these events or to give to our efforts, be sure to check out our website. Let My People Think is a listener-supported radio ministry and is furnished by Ravi Zacharias International Ministries, Atlanta, Georgia.